She had what you would call nothing, maybe less than nothing, except her pride. She stands as an example in my memory of resolution in the face of a life that seemed determined to break her spirit and leave shattered pieces scattered on bare ground. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the podcast. I'm Harley Carnes. If you have not yet done so, please like, subscribe, and follow us, and spread the word if you would. I want to say thank you before you do it, or if you already have. I don't remember her name, only met her once on a hot, late summer day in the middle of Georgia, where on days like that you can slake your own moisture from your arm like water from the side of a glass of iced tea. I think it's why iced tea is so welcome and damn near maybe ought to be the state beverage. At the time, I didn't live in Georgia. It's where a chunk of my North Carolina mountains-rooted family had located itself for 25 years or so, so we were starting to think of it as a home, in a way. It's just the heart misses the mountains the way our Scottish and Welsh ancestors would have missed hearing the skirl of bagpipes at funerals and national holidays. Chicago was where the radio business had taken me, and at the time, it seemed as though some of my own roots might take hold there. It was a great city. I loved Chicago, famously of broad shoulders, fascinating architecture, and even more intriguing people and politics. It was, to my mind, a much better place to raise a family than either New York or Los Angeles, but that was then. Now it's a kind of three-way tie for let's go someplace else. But that's not what this is about. One of my friends there was named Theodore. Not really, but we're going to call him Theodore. Tad, okay? Tad was a pretty good guy. Hail fellow well met, as the saying goes. He played a pretty good game of chess and a better game of basketball. Knew his way around a tennis court, too. He was a proper Cubs fan, which, to my mind, only meant he had not yet been to Yankee Stadium, the actual cathedral of baseball. No debate, though, Wrigley is its own very, very special place, and since the replacement of the old Yankee Stadium, Wrigley, Camden, and Fenway stand alone, with echoes of legends and the aromas of history in our memories. Tad's family had money, and he had grown up, like a lot of good Catholics, sure of his place in the world, which was just a little bit superior to most others. Politically, Tad was a good-hearted liberal. He loved everybody, thought our wealthy nation should take care of everybody, including as much of the poverty-stricken world as we could manage. I couldn't tell you if he ever actually voted. I assume he did. Tad could tell you with heartfelt zeal about how Jackie Robinson broke baseball's color barrier in 1947 in Brooklyn. He could talk about Martin Luther King's dream speech as though he had been there in Washington that day, or in Memphis the day a hateful man named James Earl Ray aimed his rifle at the left ventricle of America's conscience and made King immortal. King's words of peace and love and equality could no longer be denied, and America changed. Tad was a good guy, but there was a pretty wide streak of unintentional racism in him that he didn't know was there, and he would have argued hotly with you about it if anyone had pointed a finger at him. I suspected he had never actually been inside a black family's home, much less sat down at their table to dine on a meal that had bounced north out of the deep south, including collard greens, cornbread, fried okra, mess of beans with ham hocks to tune up the flavor. That was the late 70s. So Tad was a liberal, but it didn't come from living any kind of hard life. It came from books and college and wine and cheese soirees at which no more than 3 of the 43 in attendance would be black except for the wait staff, whose names he knew because they wore name tags. He could talk about the aching poverty of Mississippi, Alabama, and Georgia as though he had seen it. And he had, on TV and in newspapers, images that could squeeze your heart, but could never tell the whole story. He was a photographer, and a good one, and he told me he wanted to go south and take pictures of some poor black people. I was mildly irritated by the way he said it to me, but I told him sure, he and I could take a road trip. I'd introduce him to the poor black folk in the deep south, and he could record their plight on Kodak film. Well, we had a blast driving from Chicago to a small town east of Atlanta. He was a busy son of a gun with that camera, too. He'd see a farm field and In Indiana, where a farmer and some itinerant workers were hard at work, bits of corn stalks flying from the blades of a combine, maybe. Quick as a wink, he'd grab a telephoto lens from his bag, snick it into place, and capture a picturesque moment. In Tennessee, I must have stopped the car a dozen times, not to record the poor, but just to take some pictures. Kentucky and Tennessee have that kind of beauty. It's the sort that can stop you in your tracks and say, hold on, you need to remember this. He wasn't much for driving, while I love the road. You know, on the map, there are some state roads, 2 lanes that carve lines across the country that appear to be shorter to some destinations than the big highways. However, if you encounter the tail of the dragon or any number of 2 lane roads that are a whole lot like it through the Tennessee and North Carolina mountains, you will never forget it. Mind your P's and Q's and your gears and your brakes. God, it is fun. Memories to last a long, long time. It took a lot longer than it should have to make the drive, but it was worth it. We finally slid into Covington, Georgia, feeling like the Dukes of Hazzard, which was filmed there, and my dad and mom found room for us in their big old house, and we slept like we needed to. Next morning, we had coffee with my dad, who went off to work. He was building another house a few miles away, and as always, he got an early start. Mom was the supervising nurse at the cardiac care unit at the local hospital, but she still found time enough to whip up some of her sensational homemade biscuits to go with the eggs, bacon, and grits. Tad had never had biscuits that good. I knew just how he felt. My sister and 4 brothers were either still sleeping or drifting through the kitchen to have some breakfast, with a hug and a thank you, ma'am, for Mama. They wanted to know what we were up to, and when I told them Tad was a photographer, they brightened up. When he said he wanted to record for posterity images of dirt poor, and of course utterly sad and bereft black people, a couple of eyebrows raised for a tick, and one brother grinned a little and said, well, they're out there. I took him south on 36 toward Macon, which is smack in the middle of the state in just about every way you might want to describe. Along that road, there were plenty of still dirt roads that wouldn't be paved for another decade or more. What was found on those roads was every kind of life. There were sizable farms owned by white folks, or maybe black folks. There were smaller plots of land with what we call a Georgia house, not far from the road. A Georgia house is a good house made of brick, anywhere from 12 to 1,800 square feet, usually 3 bedrooms, bath and a half, living room, den, kitchen, maybe a dining room, garage, or just as likely a carport on one end. Good, solid home for good, solid, hard-working people of any color. I have pulled wire in a bunch of them. There were also, from time to time, on some of those dirt roads, just exactly what Tad from Chicago, who knew all about Jackie Robinson, was looking for. I wasn't driving fast because it was hot and the red clay dirt of the road made a cloud of dust behind us that would catch up any time I stopped. So, of course, Tad hollered, stop. He had picked well. There was an old clapboard house that looked like it might have been a sharecropper's cabin from early in the century, Depression era anyway. It was a meager bungalow, maybe 5 or 6 rooms, and there were gaps where some of the boards sagged. The whole house looked exhausted, but determined not to just fall down. I was pretty sure it had not seen a coat of paint in a very long time. 30, 40 years? No way to know. The wood had been baked and bleached gray by the sun, hammered by thunderstorms and frozen by frost and occasional light snow in winter. The wood stove inside would have worked hard to fight back. When I looked closer, I could see chunks of foam insulation and packing material shoved into and behind the cracks. There was a wire fence that enclosed the house and the front yard and the backyards. It was similar to chicken wire, but a little taller than that, and like any wire fence, there were sections that were no longer straight. 3 little kids played in the yard at the side of the house. The youngest one ran to his mommy and peeked out from behind her rump at the 2 white men who were getting out of the car. His mama had a broom in her hand, and she was sweeping the yard. She was wearing a plain light blue patterned dress. She wore no bra, and her ample breasts swayed behind the thin and old fabric. On her feet were well-worn shoes, almost like house shoes, not much in the way of cushioning for her feet. Her hair was bunched into a bun, and her almond eyes looked at us with intelligence and at least a hint of suspicion. I thought with a touch of makeup and a whole new outfit, there just might be a pretty woman standing there. Pretty, and pretty damn tired, too. Easy to see that, but let me say part of that again. The woman was sweeping the hard-packed dirt that was her front yard. See, that spoke volumes to me. Tad had no idea what he was seeing. This woman, who on scales that are familiar to us, had nothing but pride. She had no grass growing in her tiny front yard, and only scattered tufts of green that dotted the side and the backyards. It was red clay dirt. It's called red clay for a reason. It's red because there's a lot of iron in it, and since it is clayish, you can pack it down hard and tend to it, make it look smooth. She was sweeping away any imperfections in its surface. There was no litter, no broken bottles, or any other kind of discards. She didn't have much, but she still had her pride, which insisted on being seen and respected. Tad raised his camera to take a picture. I turned to him, pushed the camera down, and said quietly, "If you take that woman's picture without asking her permission, I will punch you right in the mouth." He looked surprised, a little bit hurt maybe. After all, we were friends, and he'd never heard anything like that out of me. Heck, we'd just driven about 900 miles together and eaten grits together. Yeah. I waved at the woman, smiled, and she walked closer. "Morning, ma'am." She nodded at me, maybe a little wary, said, "Morning, sir." I grinned at her and said, "My daddy's, sir. Please call me Harley." She took my hand, shook it, thin but strong, cool to the touch. She gave me just the flash of a smile back. Now was the time, so I looked at her and gave a little wave toward the horizon. I said, "I'm from here. My folks are up in Covington. Went to high school there. I'm a reporter now, working for a big radio station up in Chicago," which seemed to impress her. Chicago has figured large in the history of poor black people from the South. "My friend here is Tad." They shook hands. "As you can see by the camera around his neck, he's a photographer, and he would like permission to take your picture and maybe some pictures around the house here." "What for?" Well, now it's Tad's turn. He told her about what he did, taking pictures of people in every kind of situation, all kinds of places. He is a charming guy, and in fairly short order, she agreed to pose for a few shots. He didn't really want posed pictures, but he didn't tell her that. If posing made her happy, he was good with it. There would be plenty of real-life shots along the way. She was a real Southern lady, told us about how she and her kids were on their own since her husband had been killed in a bar fight 2 years before that. She said he'd been a good man, but drank some, and it made trouble for him sometimes. She got a welfare check and some food stamps, but she had no car, had no way to go farther than she could walk, which she did. That was so she could carry 2 big canvas bags of groceries all the way home. Sometimes she'd get a ride from the farmer who lived nearby. He had a pickup truck, and she tried to time her grocery store visits to his need to visit the store. It was a long, long walk, but as she put it, couldn't be helped. She allowed us inside her home. The air smelled of cabbage, because cabbage is nutritious, inexpensive, and one of them will feed 4 people no problem. She did not have fancy wallpaper. The walls were not painted. They had been once upon a time, I'm sure, but that paint was chipped and faded and ugly, she said. So she had covered the walls of her living room with pages from catalogs. It wasn't haphazard either. She tended toward images that included anything scenic. There was a section that celebrated kitchen pots and pans and appliances. One part of one wall next to the window was papered with scenic countryside images from travel magazines. Sometimes junk mail meant decoration for her. She made us some iced tea. We were only too happy to say yes to that. Her air conditioner didn't seem to be working. Once she let us inside her home, her sanctum, she opened up and talked to us, mostly me. Tad wanted to know why she lived there, how she could live there. He asked her. She told him it was her home. He suggested she might want to move to a big city like Atlanta or even Chicago, where there are a great many charitable programs that can help. She told him she wanted nothing to do with those places. She hated to take welfare but had no choice at the moment. She couldn't get a job, even something like cleaning houses, because she had three little kids and they needed their mama. Maybe when they were all in school, she talked about getting her house fixed up someday. She knew how to drive. Maybe someday she'd buy some old sled. She made it clear to Tad and me that she was a free woman, free to live as she chose, would make sure her kids went to school and to church, both of which were just a couple of miles away. The bus would pick up the kids. They could walk to church together. When Tad was happy with his multiple rolls of film, I offered to give the woman some money. She looked insulted, said no. She said we were visitors in her home and she wasn't looking to. I stopped her with one upraised finger and I told her, ma'am, Tad pays people all the time for access and for letting him take their picture. She seemed surprised. Her level of innocence was a shock to me given the hard life she had lived. I told her, I know the money will come in handy. Heck, money always comes in handy. She couldn't help but smile at that, of course. Maybe you can get something for the kids. That's when she said, okay. Tad thanked her for her hospitality, promised to send some of the pictures to her once the film had been developed and some pictures were printed. She seemed to really like that idea. He handed her a small wad of cash, maybe $100, maybe a little more. This was about 1978, remember, so it seemed like more then than it does now. Gasoline was less than $1 a gallon in those days. I gave her another 100 and change as we went out the door. I knew it wasn't the lottery for her, but it would help. Here's the point of it all. When we drove away, Tad was quiet. I didn't interrupt his mental reviewing. He had a lot to think about. There were tears in his eyes when he turned toward me and he said, I had no idea. Yeah, I know, I said. See, I am always ready with great wisdom pearls. I just take so much, everything, he said, for granted. Her world, he was stumped again. Life lessons and realizations and insights were bombarding him, and he was reeling a bit. Like I said, he is a smart guy. He was learning. That's what it was. The last two stages of learning after an experience are correlation and application, correlating what you have experienced with the backdrop of life. Suppositions and concepts given birth in academia evaporate sometimes like a morning mist when confronted by the rising sun. Her world, he repeated, is, I said deliberately, her world. Tad was perplexed. She could take those kids to Atlanta, but she doesn't want to. But dude, she has Sears and Roebuck on the walls. He was grappling but falling short. She is living the dream that Martin Luther King was talking about. That, he almost shouted, is nobody's dream. I didn't say she had achieved the dream. I said she was living in it. She has the freedom, thanks in large part to Dr. King and his death, to live her life as she chooses without having people tell her what she can and can't do. She's fished around for her own bootstraps and she's pulling on them in her way, at her speed. She sweeps her yard. Would you? Would I what? Sweep the dirt? Hell no, said Tad. If that's all you had for a front yard? He grew quiet again. So did I. We don't know much about her, I said, but we know this. She's no quitter. I have a feeling one or more of those kids is going to go on to do some big stuff in life. That kid will have a hell of a story to tell about growing up in a cramped, meager house on the side of a dirt road in the middle of Georgia, raised by a mama who had no quit in her, a mama who insisted he get an education and go to church and pay attention. I think she's already made the world a better place, just doesn't know it yet. Maybe so, if she survives that life long enough to see it happen. I'm betting she will, I told him. Why's that? Because she sweeps the yard. Yep, she does sweep the yard. You know, I can't believe it after all this time. That woman still gets to me. That's about it for this podcast. I just thought about that woman the other day when I saw a teenager who is clearly allergic to work arguing with her mother about the need to clean up the mess she had made. Never knew what mess they were talking about, but I thought about the spoiled and entitled life so many of today's young folks are living and the failures we are setting them up for by not sweeping the yard. I've never forgotten that woman or her house, her kids, or her broom. And I hope she stays with you for at least a little while, too. If you've enjoyed the podcast, please remember, I can't do it without you. So like, follow, subscribe, and all those things that we do in social media these days in support of whatever we find worthwhile. We are on YouTube and Spotify, and of course, through my own website, harleycarnes.com. I want to thank you for being there. I am Harley Carnes, and until next time, whatever you do, be well and fly safe.